Good afternoon and welcome to the Atlantic Council in New York. I'm Fred Kim. And so we're happy to have so many joining us online and happy to have you all in a room. New Atlantic Council TV series and a flagship series of the Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security's Adrienne Arsht National Security Resilience Initiative. Short time, the initiative has already made a strong impact, building a task force of leading national security resilience experts. Risk series, which is one of my favorite things of all the things we do. It brought attention to the imprisonment of reporter Evan Gershkovich, national security policy at the global, national, and importantly, individual level. It's an idea more relevant than ever. So the person who has taught me more about resilience than anyone else is Adrienne Arsht, who have embodied the spirit of resilience in the face of war, government oppression, and social barriers. We're honored to be joined today by some of the individual spotlight his books, but also read them. An award-winning author who served 5 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan as a Marine. He's also, importantly, a board member of the Atlantic Council. Masih Ahmadinejad is an Iranian dissident and activist who survived assassination attempts from the Iranian government. David Wood is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist who has written about the unique form of post-traumatic stress disorder service members in Iraq and Afghanistan experience. Nicole Malakovsky is the first female pilot selected to fly as part of the U.S. Air Force demonstration squadron. Resilience comes in all sorts of shapes and sizes. Before we get to the videos, I'd like to introduce the extraordinary Adrienne Arsht, Executive Vice Chair of the Atlantic Council's board, and founder of a couple of centers and many other things. I see she's walking up here, so I'm going to accelerate this. And just tell you that this event wouldn't be possible without her without her vision and her generous support. I also want to thank the Atlantic Council staff who helped realize this series. So Adrienne, the only thing I'm going to add to this is she just got the highest award that the state of Delaware gives last week at the Atlantic Council. And I said something there that I'll say here, which is of all the issues she touches, the people she touches, the institutions she touches, we all come away better for it. So Adrienne, the podium is yours.
Thank you, Fred, and it's really a pleasure to be here with all of you and all of you who are watching. I founded and launched the Adrienne Arsht National Security Resilience Initiative a little over a year ago, in part due to my recognition that resilience as a concept was often missing in discussions around national security. Central to this concept of resilience is the strength of individuals, including, of course, those who work in national security, such as diplomats, intelligence officials, journalists, dissidents, advocates, military personnel, veterans, law enforcement, and civilians who all work together in a variety of crucial roles across the national security enterprise. When we have strong, resilient people working in these spaces, the United States, our allies, our democracy, and our rights are stronger and more secure. In July, we released the concept of Profiles in Resilience, which is our new flagship ACTV, which I guess is Atlantic Council TV series, which puts the focus on individuals and their stories. Today, you will hear from a former Special Ops Marine officer, a trailblazing fighter pilot, a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, and a leading advocate for a free Iran and democracy worldwide. Their stories are engaging, captivating, timely, and important. The participants will share not only stories from their careers, but also what makes them resilient, what resilience means to them, how they've dealt with adversity, and how we can all work to better build resilience individually, structurally, and globally. While we will premiere all the episodes today, keep an eye on the Atlantic Council's social media pages and sign up for ACTV, the Council's streaming service where all episodes will be posted. I would now like to introduce the host of today's event and the featured guest in episode 1 of Profiles in Resilience, Mr. Elliot Ackerman. And I have a long list of things to say about him. Fred has said the key points, but full confession, Elliot married Lee, who is the daughter of a schoolmate of mine from the age of 6. So I consider him family. His mother-in-law lives down the road from me. And now I turn this over to Elliot for more substantive remarks.
Well, thank you, Adrian, and being introduced by way of my wife and mother-in-law is probably the absolute best way for me to ever be introduced, so I will leave it at that. But thank you, Adrian. Thank you, Fred. It is an absolute pleasure to be here today. I'm also a non-resident senior fellow with the Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Securities for Defense Program, as well as being Lee's husband and Carol's son-in-law. So resilience. Resilience is more than just a personal trait. In national security and in life, it's what enables us to navigate uncertainty, recover from setbacks, and I think to keep moving forward with a purpose. And whether it's on the battlefield or transitioning to civilian life, or for me, even while writing, I've seen how vital it is to develop the discipline and the mindset to persist even when the path ahead isn't necessarily clear. So Profiles in Resilience tells the stories of normal individuals who have demonstrated extraordinary resilience in the face of adversity. Each have a distinct background, as we already mentioned, and each offer, I think, pretty powerful insights into what resilience looks like when put into action. So after the screening, I'm going to be sitting down with Matt Croning, the director of the Scowcroft Center, for a conversation to unpack some of the themes that we'll hear in the series and to reflect on how these lessons can inform the work that we do both inside and outside of national security. So now I am pleased to share with you the first season of Profiles in Resilience. Thank you for being here today, and I hope you enjoy the program.
There was one moment in the Second Battle of Fallujah on the 3rd day where our platoon, we found ourselves way out in front of not only our infantry battalion, but the entire Marine Division, and found ourselves surrounded in a small store. It was called the Candy Store. I'm Elliot Ackerman, an author, former Marine, and CIA officer. I was the platoon commander, so I sort of went down to the lower floors of where we've been fighting. There was only one entryway in or out of our house. So when I went down there to see if we could safely get out, I kind of poked my head out the front door, and immediately a burst of machine gun fire kind of stitched up the walls around me. Fortunately, I was fine, and I kind of barreled back inside, and we had to figure out how we were going to get out of this house. So that's obviously, sort of a tense moment, easy to despair. And one of the Marines in our platoon, he was a combat engineer. Young guy, he put forward an idea. He said, well, I've got a bunch of plastic explosives with me. Why don't we just make our own door? So that was sort of a moment when I look back, when we were sort of down at our lowest points, and we'd taken casualties during that day. It had been some really tough fighting, where we sort of found our inner resilience as a group, figured out a unconventional plan to break out of a very difficult situation. I would define resilience as just the ability to get yourself back up off the floor. It is an essential component of success, not only professional success, but also personal success. One of the ways you stay resilient in those types of moments is you don't take counsel of despair. You don't look down, you look up, and you have to have the discipline to do that. It can be very easy when events turn challenging to just sort of wallow in the challenge set before you. And it takes a certain degree of self-discipline to not engage in that behavior and just figure a way out. Anyway, try anything, do anything. And then after the fact, you can unpack the meaning of everything, but being in the moment and just getting done what needs to get done is important. I mean, that's fundamentally what resilience is. One of the challenges I think anyone who serves in the military, particularly if you serve in combat and don't make a career out of military service, is figuring out not only the peaks and valleys of that type of a career, where on the one hand you can be experiencing sort of intense combat, surrounded by people who are some of your closest friends, to coming home, living in garrison, which is much more boring, much more routinized. And then as you transition out of the military, sort of figuring out what comes next. What is your second act going to be? And where are you going to go, professionally and personally, to find the sense of purpose and a sense of camaraderie that you once enjoyed in the military? It was certainly a challenge for me, figuring out how to navigate those transitions. It's a little different for everybody, but I think essential to not only being successful, but ultimately being happy and fulfilled. When it comes to those types of transitions, I think it's very important to be self-analytical, meaning having the capacity to pause, reflect, really do the work to kind of understand who you are and why you might enjoy doing what you're doing at any given moment, or why it might fill you with purpose, and then sort of figuring out, what other enterprise you can engage in that will similarly fulfill you. So it's a lot of, self-reflection, and then once you've sort of done at least the baseline of that reflection, a lot of hard work in terms of building something new that, that is sustainable. I think the very act of writing is a resilient enterprise. Anything a person writes, you start by looking at a blank page, which, whether the project for me is a 1,000-word article or a 400-page book, I assure you is a very daunting experience and feeling. But where resilience comes into writing is it's that ability to have a vision for whatever the project's going to be, and to have faith in that vision, and to wake up every day and dedicate yourself to that vision, and then slowly start to see that vision cohere into something that is real and valuable. One of the books that I've written that engages, at least with my own story, and I think there are themes of resilience throughout that story, is probably the memoir I wrote called Places and Names, which very much reflects on not only my experience in Iraq, but also my transition to being a journalist and covering the war in Syria. It was helping me start to understand, and also come to terms with these experiences that I'd had as a Marine. And I kind of come out of that journey with a greater deal of peace and a greater sense of resilience about what I'd been through. Individual resilience is a key component of national security, because national security is fundamentally a pretty rough profession. We're dealing with some of the most challenging issues that face our nation. There can be some real highs in that, some moments where you certainly feel like you're standing at the fulcrum of history, and some real lows, the sort of drudging work that can come with maybe a staff assignment back in Washington, D.C., or a posting that might not excite you as much as it could. So I think it's very important to be able to sort of move through the challenging moments, and also enjoy those highs while you can, without them sort of knocking out your fundamental anchor. I would tell anyone working in national security that it's important to carve out time for deep thinking, deep reflection, self-analysis. It's very important to, might sound cliche, to find time with family and particularly good friends. Keep checking in with those people, because those types of relationships, I think, are fundamentally what can anchor you and keep you resilient.
It has been now 15 years that I haven't seen my mother. I haven't hugged my brother, my family, for the crime of just giving voice to voiceless people, for the crime of just having different opinion, helping women to be loud, to say no to oppression. My name is Masih Ali Nejad. I'm an Iranian journalist, author, women's rights activist. And of course, I'm a troublemaker for the oppressors in Iran. Being a journalist in Iran is dangerous. So now imagine being a woman and a journalist. So for me, it was not easy. Basically, I got kicked out from everywhere just because of asking too many questions. I had two options: to live in Iran and be quiet, or leave my country and be loud. That's not in my DNA to be quiet. I have a loud voice. So I decided to leave Iran and use my freedom to be loud, to give voice to voiceless people. It was not easy for me to leave my homeland, but that's the only option. And I remember even during the election 2009, when I was there, the security forces vandalized my car, and they put my journalistic ID under the vehicle of my car. So that was a sign that right now this is your ID, but next can be you. So I left Iran. The government of my country, Iran, they managed to kick me out from my homeland. They managed to take my mother away from me. And then when I was living in exile in Brooklyn, I planted a cherry blossom to honor my mother. That's how I resist when it comes to live in exile. So every morning I used to go to my garden and hug the cherry blossom. I remember my stepson was telling my husband that, wow, Masih just kissed the tree. I saw her. And my husband was like, yeah, Masih talks to the tree. She hugs the tree. Because this is how I survive. And guess what? Now the regime sent the killers. The killer with AK-47 was hiding behind my tall sunflower to kill me. So the government managed to force me to leave the garden as well. That's what exile means, what dictatorship means, what journalism, activism mean when the terrorist regime is in charge. Doesn't matter, you're miles away from your homeland. They can follow you anywhere. Resilience to me is not just being brave. It's sometimes writing down your fear and your struggles, your challenges. To me, writing is a therapy, to be honest, because you cannot be strong. You cannot be strong when the killer is in front of your house with AK-47. What is going to help you? My definition of resilience is to write about it, to tell people that I am really scared. And then you will mobilize other people who survived tyranny, who survived assassination plot. They will come to you and they will tell you, yes, they had this fear inside them. So sharing your story will create a platform to get together. So that's how I resist fear. Speaking up, sharing my fear, and calling other people to get together. For me, togetherness is a definition of resilience. Togetherness will actually help us to be more stronger in the face of tyranny, bullies, harassers, dictators. That's how actually Iranian women are now brave enough to say no, because they're not alone. They started to use social media as their weapon, share their fear and struggle, and get together and go back to street to practice their civil disobedience. Compulsory hijab is like one of the most visible symbol of dictators like Taliban, like ISIS, and the Islamic Republic. So it's not about like my hair. As you see, I have too much hair. Let me show you. I had to cover them from the age of 7. When I was just, schoolgirl, going to school, I had to cover them all. If not, you won't be able to get an education in Iran. You won't be able to exist in Iran. So that's why I launched my campaign in 2014. I asked Iranian women to share their own experiences, how they face morality police. I was bombarded by videos of women bravely walking unveiled in the street, which is a punishable crime. And you know what? The regime actually was terrified by seeing that they're being exposed. Like the videos under the hashtag "My camera is my weapon" was everywhere on international media. Morality police dragging women to the van and beating women was everywhere. So that's why the regime created a law under my name saying if anyone make video and send it to Masih Alinejad will be charged up to 10 years prison. Can you believe that? I mean, if you send me a video, you will be in prison for 10 years. That's a reality. But that didn't stop the women of Iran. So I'm so proud that I launched this campaign. And I knew that women of Iran are brave enough to shake the main pillar of the Islamic Republic. And I'm telling you that these women are going to take back to the street again alongside men and will say to the rest of the world that we're ready to run the country. To be honest, when I was on CNN saying that I have no fear to the killers, to the assassins, come and kill me, it was a big lie. Inside me, there was a fear, but I learned how to overcome my fear. I grew up in a very tiny village where we didn't have running water, electricity, and I was really scared of darkness. We didn't have inside bathroom, and during the night, I had to use the outhouse in the backyard garden, and I was scared of the darkness as a 8-year or 9-year-old girl. My mom told me something which became a lesson for me. She said, darkness is like a monster. Darkness can swallow you all if you're scared of the darkness. But instead of being scared of the darkness, just stare into the darkness. Then the darkness will disappear. So this is how I learned. When I have a fear of darkness, like dictators, killers, oppression, I open my eyes. And that's how I tell myself that I should not be scared. Because if I get scared, then I'm gonna be like this, not moving. But when I move forward, I can see that I actually tell the dictators that come and kill me. They understand that they cannot use like an assassination plot as a tool to keep me silent. So I start a campaign asking all those who survived assassination plot, who actually facing bullies in the street. So I asked them to use their camera and film the oppressors. They have the fear inside their heart, but when they go and film them, then, the bullies go away, disappear like darkness. That's my tactic that I learned from my mother. The only thing that helped me to survive all the sorrows and sadness and oppression is just the women in Iran when I see them. Every day when I talk to the mothers of those who got killed by the regime, they're telling me that they have only 2 options: to feel miserable or to make the oppressors feel miserable. I follow their path and I choose the second one. That's the only way. The regime managed to take everything away from us: homeland, freedom, dignity, everything, family, everything, but not hope. So I learned from Iranian women. They're badass. Some of them, they lost their eyes. Kosar, only 22 years old. She lost her eyes during the uprising in Iran. When I talked to her, she said, but I have one eye and I can still see an Iran without Islamic Republic, without oppressive regime. So these are my heroes. If you ask me, the support system in America, first, my neighbors, the American citizens, but also there are human rights organizations. They help me a lot. I thought that I'm strong, but hey, facing assassination plots, seeing your own brother going in prison, being punished because of your activities, seeing your sister on Iranian national television disowning you publicly, seeing your own mother being interrogated, not easy. I can't tell you how seeing other dissidents going through all the difficulties and challenges helped me to feel like I'm not alone. For instance, when I was invited by Human Rights Organization, Human Rights Foundation on a stage, I thought I'm the only one face the killers in front of my garden. I'm the only dead woman walking around. But I saw a lot of dead men and dead women walking and talking on the stage. And I was like, wow, I'm not alone.
I'd seen people blown up. I'd seen people die in front of me. I'd been shot at, but this was so horrific. The sight, the smell, the shattering of my worldview, that the only thing I could go on was just denial. My name is David Wood. I'm a journalist, retired mostly, still working on books. I was doing a story on Mozambique, and it was a time when there was a war going on with next door Rhodesia, the white regime in Rhodesia, and black nationalist guerrillas were largely camped out of Mozambique. Those guerrilla camps were mostly women and children, because when guys signed up to go with the rebel army, that guy brought his family with him. So there was a massacre of these, non-combatants, basically, which I stumbled across, and that drove me to my knees. Partly, it was the horror of seeing what the Rhodesians had done. They shot as many people as they could, and then before they left, they set the brush on fire so that there were any survivors, they burned to death. And I got there at dawn the next day, and the smell was overpowering. The sight of all these burned bodies was something that I could not have imagined. And there was something else going on, and that was that my whole moral belief system was that things like this didn't happen, that the world was basically a good place, and that nonviolent resistance could overcome any force. Well, this completely shattered that whole set of ideas. When I got back to the capital, Maputo, in Mozambique, I filed a story to Time magazine. It's a pretty clinical description of what happened. There's no emotion in it at all. No mention of the smell or anything like that. And then I wrote my parents a letter, which I said, just been on this 3-week journey through Mozambique, and nothing much interesting happened. It was pretty much a waste of time. No mention of any massacre or anything like that. Denial works. So I think resilience is your ability to overcome obstacles, whether they're psychological or real. I think there's a component of resilience which is physical, because I've been in situations where I felt my resilience was a little low and I couldn't really operate physically the way I wanted to. But I think that's probably a small part of it. The bigger part of it is psychological, and it's partly a belief in yourself, a belief in your ability to overcome obstacles, self-confidence. All those things make up a sense of resilience, and an ability to look beyond the immediate crisis, to recognize, I'm good, this is a little rough, but I can get through this. That's part of resilience. And then denial is also, I think, a good part of resilience. My experience has been that we all walk around with a reservoir of resilience. And in ordinary times, we draw on that a little bit. Bad things happen, we shrug it off, we're okay, we keep going, that's fine. There are things that happen in life that are so traumatic that they empty out your reservoir of resilience. And at that point, you need outside help, whether it's spiritual, whether it comes from a community, whether it comes from a loved one, but you need to have some kind of outside source of resilience, otherwise you just can't go on. By the time it got to the war in Bosnia, which was 1992, 3, 4, 5, I became aware that journalists were targets. It got too dangerous for me to go out by myself as a war correspondent. So from that point on, I only embedded with American troops. Soldiers and Marines. I spent a year embedded with a Marine battalion. We spent 6 months training, and then we went to Somalia. This was during the Black Hawk Down episode. It was during that experience that I spent a year with them that I began to see how they developed that community of combat soldiers and Marines. Starts in basic training or boot camp, where the drill sergeants says, this is your battle buddy. You're responsible for that person no matter what. And that rule eventually becomes a value, an internalized value, because there's somebody watching out for you. And that idea, it develops into what I had seen as unconditional devotion. Unconditional, which means you would lay down your life for your buddies, even for someone you don't like. And when bad things happen, that's what they lean on. And I've seen soldiers and Marines in the war zone have their resilience reservoir pretty much depleted. And at that point, it's that community that helps refill their resilience and gets them through bad times. There are still bad things that happen, but in the moment of trauma, in the moment of crisis, it's that tight community that gives them resilience. So last time I was in Afghanistan, I was almost 60 years old. So I was almost 3 times as old as everybody else there. So there was a kind of they felt like you would about your grandfather being there. Right? So I was on a mission with the Marines, and there was a Marine gunnery sergeant who sort of adopted me. He was a big bear of a guy. And we went on a mission, a helicopter raid. And when we got down the ramp of the helicopter, he pushed me down in the dirt behind this sort of berm, and we were taking fire. And then when we could, he just yanked me upright, and I had a full backpack on, so I was pretty heavy, but I felt protected by them, and I felt like I could keep my reservoir of resilience pretty full while I was doing my job. And, my job was get a story. So the whole time this is going on, I'm thinking, what is the story here? The story is this raid. Okay, what do I need to tell this story? So I'm busy. But the gunner had me, and that was a good feeling. To work to build a sense of community with whoever you're with, whether those are other journalists, whether they're civilian NGO workers, or whoever you come in contact with. Or, if you're lucky enough to be embedded, and I think that's a great way to do the reporting, to develop, to work on, to be aware of that sense of community so that it's there when you need it, because you'll need it.
In 2015, I was a full bird colonel working at the White House. I was physically fit, mentally fit, spiritually fit, and pretty much very unexpectedly and unwelcome, I fell severely ill overnight. I would spend the next 2 years and the last 2 years of my military service essentially housebound and bedridden. My name's Colonel Nicole Malachowski, United States Air Force retired. I spent over 21 years as an officer and a fighter pilot in the United States Air Force, and I'm currently a global consultant, a professional speaker, as well as a healthcare patient advocate. I flew the F-15E Strike Eagle in 3 operational F-15E squadrons. I commanded a squadron of F-15Es, had the privilege in there to serve as a White House Fellow, as well as fly the F-16 as an Air Force Thunderbird pilot, and culminated my career back in the East Wing of the White House working for the then First Lady, Michelle Obama. On the 29th of December 2017, I was medically retired from the career that I loved the most. Resilience to me is about moving forward with refined clarity and purpose, having grown into a different person because of the adversity that you faced. When I think about my time as a fighter squadron commander, from a leadership perspective, I think resilience is the ability to deal with the unexpected in a way that you're adaptable and flexible and that you are able to move forward stronger than you were before. I think it's hard to be a fighter pilot regardless of, your background or gender or any of that. It's a pretty tough and challenging profession for anybody to be in. Certainly becoming the first woman Thunderbird pilot presented its own unique challenges. I will say when I joined the team, I was young, I was 29 years old, I was a captain, and I was blissfully naive to the outside world and how other people were going to either support or oppose my presence on the team. I will admit though that it was the first time in my life that I was acutely aware that there were some people out there actively rooting for me to fail. And I think when you're young and you're still trying to gain experience and credibility, that can be a difficult thing, to have to deal with. Lucky for me, I was surrounded by a great team, and I flew with 5 other, wonderful male pilots, and they were my age, right? So they didn't know an Air Force without women fighter pilots in it. So for all of us, this was just kind of business as usual. And I think that was very helpful to me getting through some of those challenges. There's also, I think, levels of individual resilience. And so for me, it was about making sure that when I was not on the road flying with the Thunderbirds, that I was nurturing myself, right? Especially by taking care, by making sure I worked out or making sure I took time to do the hobbies that I enjoyed, such as, for example, cooking is something that brings me a lot of joy. Hanging out with my husband, doing things with him, reminding myself of the people at that very core who really have my back, and making sure I continue to nurture those relationships during that difficult time. And so I think those things help me stay resilient. My illness actually started back in the summer of 2012. About 2 weeks into it, I realized I wasn't getting better, and about the same time, I presented with a rash on my right hip. So I made the decision to finally go see the military flight surgeon. Went into the office, described my kind of flu-like symptoms, showed them my rash, and I remember them distinctly saying, "We don't have Lyme disease in North Carolina." And that would be the moment in the day that I would become chronically ill for the rest of my life. I would be basically a medical mystery for the next 4 years. So my symptoms would wax, they would wane, they would come and they would go, and every time they would flare, they would get worse and worse. And I would gain new symptoms along the way. In fact, at my very worst, my symptom list was 63 individual symptoms long, covering every single system in my body. I didn't want to lose my career. I knew the doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong with me, so I kept trying to just forge ahead. And then in the summer of 2016, so about 4 years from the onset of my symptoms, I woke up in my room here in Springfield, Virginia, at my house, and I had basically temporary locked-in syndrome. I couldn't move and I couldn't speak. And I would go through these moments of being completely paralyzed, and then I would come out of it. I am the survivor of late-stage neurological tick-borne illness. I went from an extremely high-performing, physically fit, mentally fit, spiritually fit, Air Force officer and fighter pilot to completely broken overnight and 100% dependent on other people for all of my activities of daily living. And so this would indeed be the culminating kind of moment that ended my career. One of the most difficult things about that time was it was never my intention to retire. I had every intention of staying in and serving as long as I could, hopefully at higher levels of responsibility. And so all of a sudden, overnight, I was faced with pretty much an existential crisis. Who am I if I'm not wearing my nation's uniform? What's my contribution to society if I'm not a fighter pilot? How am I going to provide for my family? And I think it was probably the lowest time in my life. So as I was going through this process of reinvention and reimagining, what I could do in this next phase of my life, I came across a Japanese philosophy called ikigai. Ikigai is all about finding your life's purpose, and it's about finding kind of an intersection of four things. So it's something you love, something you're good at, something you can get paid for, and something that the world needs. And as I was trying to kind of look at those four questions through the lens of my life, I kept getting stuck on one thing. And it was something you're good at, because I had a really hard time envisioning myself as anything other than an Air Force officer, as anything other than a fighter pilot. What does a fighter pilot go on to do if they're not, flying planes? And I had to really dig deep, and I kept getting stuck there. And it hit me one day: ask the people around you, ask the people that know you, the people who saw you not only at your best, but the people who saw you at your worst. And it was in those conversations that I discovered what I was good at. I realized that all of the characteristics and traits that I had honed as a fighter pilot, discipline, commitment, focus, confidence, grit, all of those things were exactly what was necessary to help me survive my illness, to make it effectively through rehabilitation, and to reinvent myself into the consultant, the speaker, and the patient advocate that I am today.
Wow, what a powerful, moving, and inspiring set of stories. I'm Matthew Kranig. I oversee the Adrienne Arsh National Security Resilience Initiative at the Atlantic Council. Thank you so much for joining today, but most importantly, thanks to the four individuals we just saw who shared their stories, and thank them also for the strength they've shown and the example they've shown for the rest of us. We're very lucky today to have two of the individuals featured in our first series with us in person. Sitting here in the front row, we have David Wood. David, thank you for sharing your story and for coming all the way up to be with us here today. Also with us, as you know, we have Elliot Ackerman, and so I think the idea now will, and Elliot, I guess, also thanks to you for sharing your story and for being here today. So we have 15 minutes or so for a conversation, and we just saw these four powerful stories. What are the common themes that you see or lessons learned from those four stories?
I hadn't seen any of those before this, and so I was sort of thinking about that, watching the other stories, and I think a through line for me is probably purpose, that each person in their own way and articulated in different frameworks finds their resilience by kind of returning to their purpose or the purpose of their community, that whatever that is, whether it's flying and returning to that, as we just heard, how do I reinvent myself based off of the traits that I exhibited flying, or Dave was talking about the community. I certainly recognize the community that an organization like the Marine Corps provides. That can really recenter you when you are feeling as though your resiliency tank is at rock bottom. So I think those were some of the common themes that I was thinking about watching those profiles.
I heard that too, purpose, community. Another theme that came up was writing. Masi talked about writing, and in your episode you spoke about how writing places and names helped you process your experience. Could you talk a little bit more about that process, and how did the self-reflection through writing contribute to your resilience?
Sure. I think, writing, and I'll just speak when I write, oftentimes you're doing a sort of a deep type of thinking and a type of creation where you're making meaning out of events, right? Because you're creating stories, and that's fundamentally what stories are, is we are taking disparate events, chaotic circumstances, and we're arranging them into a shape, into a beginning, a middle, an end, and usually that shape of a story has some meaning. And so that meaning is also, I think, sort of almost a synonym for purpose. So I think it's that, again, it's that returning to center, to understanding, who am I, what are these experiences about, and that recentering can allow us to go on and sort of find the resilience we need to tackle whatever is next.
Yeah. So one of the things we want to do with the Adrienne Arsh National Security Resilience Initiative is to inculcate resilience as a central tenet of national security policy. And so one question that's come up, a question that Adrienne Arsh, our founder, has raised is resilience more nature or is it more nurture? Is it something we can teach, or is it something you're born with? What is your answer to that question?
I think it's a little bit of both. Each one of us is born with obviously certain strengths, weaknesses, natural characteristics, and then our experiences and the work that we do are sort of an overlay on those. So I think it is both nature and nurture, but the nurture part of it, the way you build resilience, resilience is you have to start from a baseline, really understanding who you are at the individual level, or if we kind of pull out larger into the sort of the national security organizational levels, understanding the strengths of an organization, understanding its weaknesses, and understanding how we can encourage people in that context to be more resilient. So if you're a military leader, what are the constructs internal to a military organization that allow for resilience, and what are some of maybe the constructs that could be improved upon for resilience? And you can do that across any agency, organization, even at the Atlantic Council.
Good. That's good to know. And in your answer to a question a moment ago, you talked about when your resilience tank is empty. I think David Wood also used that analogy in his remarks. And I think sometimes maybe people think resilience means just pushing through no matter what, no matter the cost. But have you encountered that mindset, and is that the right way to think about it, or sometimes does resilience mean kind of taking a step back and refilling your resilience tank?
I think it means both. On the individual level, I think it means sometimes retreating, reflecting, regrouping, and each one of us, I think we probably do that differently, depending on our personality type, depending on who we fundamentally are. And I think at a more collective level, it probably deals, if you're a leader, I think so much of any type of leadership is sort of understanding the individuals, the organization that you're leading, and understanding the moments where that organization needs to kind of come back to center, regroup, figure out where the mission is not being achieved, how to reattack a problem. So it's sort of a pull and pull.
Account of where are they right? Still resilience in your team, and how do you do that as a leader?
And to push.
Sure.
I remember when I was a young Marine officer, and he sort of broke down. So one of the other his peak, and he was, I got to go. I can't do this anymore. I'm get them away from everybody else as quickly as you. Seeing him walk away, and he was a leader, and we'd already lost a lot of our leaders. Our group here is it for me to tell everybody how there's time to allow everybody to just take a moment and allow everyone in our group to have their own. I addressed needing to sort of understand what was the leadership path, leadership position. You have to know when to push and when to pull. Go spend the evening just cooking or relaxing, or in my case,
How has your views on resilience, your
be that high? So that helps. And I think I have patience in being uncomfortable, knowing not that old, but a little bit of age.
Good. Still Wood and all the individuals in our first season of Nations. And please stay tuned. Well, first, please watch our initial series and stay tuned for subsequent seasons. In person, I'd invite you to join us on the patio for our reception. Those enjoy the rest of your evening.